Maybe you've seen it. Probably you haven't. But maybe you have. Either way, I know what I've seen. And that's what matters most as far as I'm concerned. But believe what you will, I have never cared about that part of things before. I know what's out there. And you should too. In case it decides to come after you. I can't remember how old I was the first time I saw it, as though it was always there. I do know that it first started while living with my grandparents, but actually nailing down what its first appearance was is a bit difficult. You see, my sister and I were taken into state custody when I was 4 and were finally returned to our mother a month after my 10th birthday. I can honestly say those were probably the best years of my childhood. But everything has a price. And the price I paid for those years of bliss always came at night. I remember the first time I saw it. I was woken out of a dead sleep one night. I couldn't figure out what woke me, and I laid there in a groggy stupor, trying to gain my bearings. I quickly noticed the urge to pee, so I got up and walked the 5 steps it took to go to the bathroom. As I returned to my bedroom, I froze in the doorway. I scanned my room. A feeling, a dread, slowly welling up inside my small child frame. Seeing nothing, I shrugged it off and went back to bed. You see, I've always had a habit of falling asleep to horror movies or scary TV shows, usually Tales from the Crypt. So I chalked it up to a vividly wild imagination. And that damned crypt keeper. As the toilet ceased filling its tank and the hissing of water died out and eventually went mute, I noticed a distinct tapping noise. It sounded like dog nails on hardwood floor. Except the dogs were all asleep in the front yard, and our floors were carpeted. I was shaken by the noise, but quickly tried to reason in my young mind that I was just hearing things, all fueled by my addiction to scary things. So I pulled my pillow over my head and tried to go back to sleep. That's when the tapping got louder, and its tone changed. It no longer sounded like dog nails on hardwood, but instead like fingernails tapping on glass. And it sounded like it was coming from above me, coming from my window. Tentatively, I pulled my pillow from my head and slowly shifted my gaze to the window. And what I saw chilled me to the bone. Red eyes glared at me from the other side. Malevolence bleeding from them like a stuffed pig. Sharp fangs lined a pair of lips that were pulled back like a snarling tiger. Its face covered in short black fur, and it had a pair of twisted horns sprouting from its forehead. I could make out shadows of huge, leathery wings coming from its back. And when it caught my stare, its snarl quickly turned into an evil grin. I was paralyzed. And in my head, I could hear a strange, deep, gravelly voice speaking to me. But the language I didn't and still do not know. All I know is it sounded ancient and felt cruel. I do not know how long we stayed that way, but all of a sudden, I was able to break my stare and immediately scream. My grandmother pleaded with me as she entered my room, and I just sat there, blubbering like a baby, pointing at the window, and occasionally letting out an indecipherable squeak as I struggled to gain my composure and remember how to speak. I was finally able to say, "The devil is on the roof." I repeated as my grandmother gave me a quizzical look. "The devil is on the roof," she said. "You were dreaming. I keep telling you to stop watching those stories before bed. This is why. You just had a very vivid nightmare. That's all." I wanted so badly to believe her, but I knew what I had seen. Still, I laid down, and she sat there with me until I was asleep. I woke up to a bright morning, and no more incidents. The next night, I'm lying in bed, watching, you guessed it, Tales from the Crypt, when I hear the tapping again. This time, I know it's not a dream, as I hadn't fallen asleep yet. I tried to ignore it, but the tapping got increasingly louder. I was afraid the damn thing was going to break through the window. And in my fear, I looked. As soon as my eyes landed upon its horrible facade, I was frozen again. This time, the voice either spoke in English, or it gave me some way to understand it. But I clearly heard it say, "Come with me. You have been forsaken. We will not forsake you." I thought to myself, we? Who is we? And it responded, "We are many. We are one. We are here for you. And we aren't leaving without you." And that's when I realized it could hear my thoughts. "We can do more than just hear your thoughts. We can watch your memories. We can taste your fear." And with that, I felt a horrid pain in my head. My vision flared stark white and shifted to bright crimson, and finally to black. I awoke lying on the floor in the fetal position, although the last I could remember, I had been lying on my back in my bed, having a telepathic conversation with a demon. I was soaked in sweat, and I was shivering uncontrollably. I pulled myself off the floor and wobbled to the bathroom. I stripped out of my sweat-drenched clothes and climbed into the shower and let the hot water run over me, warming my still chilled flesh and bone. I didn't feel like me. It's hard to explain, but I was an energetic, exuberant little boy. That morning, however, I felt a dark, brooding energy hanging over me. I didn't want to be around people. And even though it was starting to terrify me at night, I didn't want to leave my bedroom. This continued nightly. Every night, I would either be awoken or summoned to look by a persistent tapping on my window. And when I would finally look, I'd get locked into that trance-like state that instigated our mental exchanges. And every day, I would become more and more introverted. One particular hot summer night, I woke up to an entirely new sound. The tapping had been replaced by scratching. As soon as I opened my eyes, I felt a draft come through my window. Who opened my window? And then I remembered. I remembered my grandmother coming into my room and saying how hot it was. I remember begging her not to open it, and her begrudgingly agreeing to leave it closed. She must have opened it after I fell asleep. And the scratching continued. Louder. Closer to my head. The gravelly voice. "Come with me." But this time, it was audible. I hadn't looked towards my window, using every ounce of willpower I could muster in hopes of avoiding that trance-like state. But the shock of actually hearing that voice with my own ears was enough to snap my head around out of surprise. My eyes immediately fixating upon the beast that tormented me nightly. It opened its mouth, and a fork-like tongue slithered out and licked the air like a snake. It reached with an unproportioned, sinewy arm covered in short black bristles and tried to grab me. But in the process, it broke our stare, and I was able to look away and move my body again. As I lunged off my bed and toward the door, one of its razor-sharp claws sunk deep into the meat of my shoulder. I screamed as its claw tore through skin and muscle, splashing blood across my bed and one of the walls. My grandmother came running into the room, and when she stood in the doorway, she froze. I don't know if it was the blood, the beast, or something else entirely. But she too let out a scream. I heard a large flap and felt a hard breeze push against my back. My grandfather arrived at my bedroom door and glanced around the room, saw the gore, saw the bed, took me in his arms, and rushed me to the hospital. The doctor said I must have snagged my shoulder on a nail, but couldn't understand how I could get a cut so long and deep and clean from a nail. 14 stitches in my shoulder, a tetanus shot, and we were sent home. That was the last time I ever saw that thing. I know it exists, but what it is, I do not know. what it wanted seems clear. It wanted me. Occasionally I still hear the tapping, despite it being over 20 years. My skin crawls when I hear it. But I keep not only the window closed, but the blinds as well, just to be sure I never get caught by its stare. Never hear that voice playing in my head. It's out there. Right now. Looking. This much I know. Because some nights, while I'm asleep, I dream things. Gliding over houses and land on the roof of one. I'll lean over the edge and tap on the window. And then I'll hear, clear as day, my voice purring. Come with me.